Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this little guy. This is the Emerson Mini CQC-15. First off, I want to thank my buddy Minnesota Knife Guy for sending this little guy along, and let's do a size comparison. Right here is your Spyderco Delica and your Spyderco PM2. The blade here is slightly longer than the PM2, making this not exactly a mini much of anything. Let's also look at the Ontario Rat number 2 and the Rat number 1 around here someplace. Here we go. So again, it's right in the same size range, blade-wise. And there you go. A couple of notes here. First off, this knife particularly, before it was sent to my buddy Minnesota Knife Guy, he's got a YouTube channel, by the way, somebody sharpened the back side of it in order to kind of turn it into a sort of V-grind, unlike Emerson's default sort of semi-chisel grind. So that's a little bit unusual. Don't blame Emerson for that. And the other thing is, Ernie Emerson is a martial artist. He is a fighting sort of guy, and he makes his knives for martial arts and for fighting sorts of things. The thing is, knife fighting is a very ugly business, and I'm not trained for it, and you probably aren't either. I don't recommend that you carry a knife for self-defense without that sort of training. There are much better tools to defend yourself with. But I'm going to talk about this knife not as a high-speed, low-drag, martial arts, mall ninja, ha-ha-ha, I'm going to stab you sort of knife, and more instead as an everyday carry knife. Because let's face it, unless you're living a very, very sad existence, you are going to be using a knife to open an envelope or cut up an apple way more often than you're ever going to be stabbing somebody. I really hope that's the case. So, there you go. That's what we're going to do here. We're going to talk about the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of this particular pocket knife. So on the good side, first off, this is made in the USA by actual Americans. It's a beautiful thing. I like that always to see. And I like seeing small makers, and I like supporting small makers whenever I can, and when they're doing a good job. So there you go. Next thing, even though this is the Mini, it is rather large, but it's not all that incredibly large for everyday carry. I mean, practically speaking, size in the pocket-wise, you're in very similar territory to your Spyderco PM2 here. And, you know, even a little bit smaller in terms of your width overall. So this is not a very large knife to carry. Unlike a lot of what Emerson makes, it's a decent enough size for that. Still a little big, but hey, I tend to like smaller knives. Next thing, the clip on this guy is nice. You know, it doesn't have a whole lot of ramp to it, that's for sure, but at the same time, it's got some nice spring to it, and it's a nice long clip, which provides good positive retention. I tend to like a longer clip on a knife, and so I think this is well done. It's not a particularly classy, you know, over-the-top artistic clip, but it doesn't need to be. It's a fine functional clip. Next thing, the blade shape on this guy is very unique. They refer to it as a recurved tanto, and that makes sense. It's a tanto up here, and it's a recurve down here. Business in front, party in the back. Hey, mullet. Anyways, you know, tantos are very nice. They can be good for scraping and things like that, and particularly with a chisel grind. That's a little bit even better here. It's got a nice swedge to it up on the top, although it's not, it doesn't go very deep, but it is a nice little design touch up there. You can see here that they've done a nice job with a little sort of complexity of the grind there. You do get a little point, although that's been rounded off, I think, by the last guy sharpening it. A little ugly there. But anyways, the blade shape is definitely unique and different, so I always like to see unique and different. Next thing, the steel on this guy is 154 cm, and that's a fine steel. No problems with it. Absolutely good to go. Ergonomics on this guy are fine. There were a couple of hot spots here and there, but overall it fits the hand rather nicely. It's not going anywhere in your hand. You got a nice blade guard up here. You got an area that catches, and I have smaller hands than most, but I fit very nicely inside the handle of this knife. Beautiful, beautiful thing. Next thing, it uses independent adjustments for the detent and the lock bar tension. If you watch the disassembly video, you'll see that in a little more detail, but you can see that there is a little tab over here that adjusts your detent, and there's a little, well, obviously there's the lock bar here. And so what this means is that, theoretically, you should be able to adjust the detent strength independently of the lock bar tension. So you can have relatively light lock bar tension, but still have a relatively strong detent. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. It didn't work here, but it is a neat idea, and it's something that I kind of like to. I'd like to see that a little bit more often in the knife world. So often, lock bar tensions are made really strong to get strong detents, and that has some negative consequences. So there you go. And then finally, I got to say, on the good side, Ernie Emerson does have a great mind for knife design. He has very, very specific martial goals in mind, and that leads to very specific design language and affordances. But the thing is, every Emerson knife that you see is identifiably an Emerson. he is one of those makers out there who has a very unique style. Just like Todd Begg, like ADV, to an extent Chris Reeve. A lot of folks where it's just like, oh yeah, that's an Emerson. And I always appreciate that very much. I love when a designer has a style that is very much them, that is very unique, and this is a good example of something that is going to be an Emerson. So there you go. That's, to me, what's good here, is that Emerson has a very consistent design language, and I think he does have a great mind for knife design, even if it's not the kinds of knives I tend to use. They're using the independent adjustments for detent lock bar tension. The ergos are fine. The steel is good to go. It's got a pretty unique blade shape, a nice clip. This is a little smaller than a lot of what Emerson's using, and it's made in the USA, which is a beautiful thing. So the great thing, and by the way, pardon if you're hearing any banging, I got folks up on my roof today. Anyways, the Emerson Wave is, to me, what is great about that, and that's this little little hooky guy right here. So the idea is that you've got this guy in your pocket, and then the corner of your pocket, let's say that this little finger here is the fabric in the corner of my pocket. As I'm pulling this knife out of my pocket, as I apply pressure and as I kind of hook it into that fabric, it will naturally pop the knife open. And so then, as I continue to pull, it will continue pulling the knife open. And if I do this with enough force, I will eventually end up with the knife out of my pocket and fully extended. Well, not actually cutting my pocket open or anything like that. I mean, at full speed, it's just, pretty much flawless. And the thing is, this works really well. With just a couple of minutes of practice here, you can very, very easily wave a knife open out of your pocket. And that means you've got a knife in your hand open quickly. Very, very quickly. Quicker than pulling a knife out using a flipper. Quicker than damn near anything else. The Emerson Wave is a great idea. He talks about in his Blade HQ video that it came about as, originally he was trying to have something that would trap the opponent's knife, during a knife fight. And, but he realized it catches on pockets and it's a beautiful thing. But it is a beautiful thing. You can get it on pretty much any of his knives. And he's licensed it to a bunch of other people as well. But yeah, it's a great little feature. And I appreciate it very much. It's a cool innovation. So to me, what's great about this knife is the Emerson Wave. Let's talk about what's bad here. So on the bad side, first off, this guy is using the Emerson V grind, which is actually a chisel grind. So I'll show you. On a normal knife, for instance, the Ontario Rat 2 here, you've got your main grind, then you've got the bevel for the edge, and then you've got the edge bevel, and then a main grind on the other side. It's symmetrical. It's V-shaped. On this guy, you've got your main grind, then you've got a bevel for the edge, and then on the other side, all you have is the main grind. And so it kind of comes to a more of a chisel-like thing. This isn't the problem per se. The knife can be sharp, no problem, and they will resharpen it at the factory. But the thing is, it does have some disadvantages. Chisel grinds are a little bit more complicated to sharpen on most sharpening systems, which assume a V-shaped grind. You can do it, absolutely 100%, but it's just more complicated. And they will also tend to pull to one side in cutting because, well, I mean, think about it. It's going to guide you away from the, it's going to guide you towards the unsharpened edge, if you will. Whether it's a problem or not, whatever. It's okay. If that was the only idiosyncrasy here, we'd be fine. But there is also a reason that most people in the knife-making business are not doing chisel grinds. So there you go. Next issue for me is that this knife is fairly thick behind the edge. Mind you, this is not meant for everyday cutting tasks like envelopes and boxes so much as it is meant for cutting open people. That's a separate kind of ugly, but the thickness behind the edge means that this is not a very good knife in that way. I gotta say, the use of Phillips head screws here is at some level refreshing because everybody's got Phillips head bits, and you'll be able to find them pretty much anywhere. However, Phillips head does have a nasty tendency to strip out a little bit, and if these do strip, you're gonna have a bad time. I do kind of like the fact that most knife makers use Torx rather than Phillips, and so that is something to keep in mind. Then, of course, the recurve is gonna complicate sharpening just a little bit. It's not a big deal, but it is certainly a deal. A recurve chisel grind just adds to that. And then finally, on the bad side, this has a very weak detent. You can pop this guy open just by swinging it along there, and that's not super ideal. I was able to really tighten that up by actually tightening the pivot up a little bit more. This is never going to be a smooth, false shut, drop shutty knife. There you go, drop shut. But nonetheless, that detent is very, very, very soft. Even with adjusting the detent mechanism there on that separate lever, the detent is just not well done on this knife. So that's the bad for me, is that this has an exceptionally weak detent. It does have the recurve, which is a little complicated. Phillips screws are, I don't know if they're a great choice here, but they're okay, I guess. It's pretty thick behind the edge, and it is using a chisel grind, which is something you have to keep in mind. Let's talk about the ugly here. So on the ugly side, first off, the thumb disc here is right in the middle of the slicing path, which means that if you're slicing into something, say foam, it's very easy for whatever you're cutting to get caught on this thumb disc and to hang up there. Again, this is not meant for conventional EDC cutting, that's a whole other affair, but that is kind of a problem, and that is a reason why I don't tend to like thumb discs or thumb studs that are in the slicing path, but thumb discs particularly. Next thing, and the biggest ugly thing here, is that the build quality on this knife is honestly just not very good. It's using plastic washers, which is, never a good idea. But it couples those plastic washers with a bunch of other issues. It has a very poor detent, even when I've done my best to adjust it in that way. The centering on the knife is not very good. It's very much hugging the clip side of this. It's not smooth, really, at all. Even after a full disassembly, it's not even Teflon washes smooth. It's a very stick-slippy action. I don't like it at all. On the disassembly, you saw that there was some heat discoloration from grinding off the lock face. Maybe that's not a big deal, but it is a little concerning to me. And, just overall, this knife feels very, very, very underbuilt. I am not a big fan of the build quality on this guy. I'd like to believe that this is a one-off issue, or that this is like a fake or something like that. I'm not saying that Minnesota would hand me a fake, but I've actually handled a couple of other Emersons in stores, and each time I felt this way. I've noticed similar issues of very weak detents, or rather, they're never made that well, and that's really disappointing. And this is kind of a known issue in the knife world. I forget exactly who said it, but somebody said on Instagram, the more the knife world complains about their build quality, the more they dig in their heels. And it's ugly, 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 because this is a made-in-America company. They could be doing a great job here, but they're really being lazy about the build. And then with that on top is the final bit of ugly, which is that the price is a little bit silly when this is made about as well as a Kershaw knife, which is made for about $30. I mean, $179 is not out of line for this knife if it were a small batch production made in the USA that was made really well. But the fact is, with this build, I can't go there at all. This is not made like a $100 knife, let alone like a $180 knife. So to me, that's what's ugly here, is that the price is out of line, given that the build quality is pretty terrible, and that the thumb disc is in the slicing path. So let's talk final conclusions here. So there are great knife makers in the world, there are great knife designers in the world, and there are some people who are both. Unfortunately, I think Ernie Emerson is a great knife designer, but I'm not seeing the knife making here. I mean, he is definitely the main game in town if you're looking for a martial knife. If you're looking for a knife that is designed to basically kill people, Emerson is kind of where you want to go. It's not my scene, but I get the impression that the people for whom that is their scene, meaning like soldiers and whatnot rather than serial killers, they may like them too, who knows. But I get the impression that they are working well for that group. But the problem is, no matter what the design is intended to do, it's deeply let down by the execution here. Because if we put aside the steel, this feels like something that you would get made very, very cheaply overseas, or maybe that you would get from a brand new maker working out of his garage trying to design his very first knife. This is absolutely lazy, given how long Emerson has been in the game and how good a lot of American small batch knife-making companies actually are. I mean, Olamic Cutlery, Ferrum Forge, Chris Reeve Knives, all do incredible, incredible work on fit and finish. Even Medford Knives bests this guy in terms of fit and finish, frankly, by a mile. And so it's really frustrating to see them so far behind the game. It almost feels like they've given up. It sells, so why would we bother making it any better? And the thing is, though, these designs do deserve much better, because Emerson does have a unique design voice, and he's designing knives, that is, for unique tasks. And the nice thing about it, though, is that these designs have been made much better. If you want a very high fit and finish version of an Emerson design, Zero Tolerance makes some Emerson models that are both capable of all the high-speed, low-drag stuff and very well made. The ZT is just miles and miles above this guy in terms of execution. It's not even a basis for comparison. If you're okay okay with similar build quality, Kershaw makes some Emerson designs pretty inexpensively in China that are very, very similar, if not a little better in fit and finish, but sell for 15 or 20 bucks. And so you want to keep those in mind as well. And then if you just are looking for the Emerson Wave feature, which, as I said, for me, I think is the most interesting aspect of this, you can buy Emerson Wave versions of your Spyderco Delica or Endura off of Spyderco, and a couple of other approaches. I think Cold Steel uses the Wave in a couple of places, Southern Grind, all of whom are going to be better in fit and finish than this guy. And so, okay, there are people who believe that fit and finish just doesn't matter. That, look, the knife locks open, the knife closes, that's fine. Quit your complaining, Nick. And that's fine. If you're that way, then okay, sure, the knife works, it's functional, it cuts things. And if you're completely uninterested in any fit and finish, then I guess this is something you might want to consider. But I gotta be real here. Looking at the knife world, looking at the rest of the knife community, and so many beautiful options that are available out there, I can't recommend something that's made like this. I just can't, at least not at this price point. So, I mean, there you go. Like I said, interesting designs, but oh man, do they need to work on the execution. Which is funny, because these knives are kind of designed for execution. Weird. Anyways, hope this has been interesting to you, that you have yourself a wonderful rest of the day, and we can wave goodbye to this review. Get it? Emerson Wave? Huh? All right. Bye now.